First of the Army missiles is the Hawk. This missile is a versatile air defense weapon designed to reinforce the low-altitude capabilities of the nation's air defenses. It is capable of destroying attackers flying at even the lowest altitudes at ranges ensuring effective protection. The rear portion of the Hawk contains the solid propellant engine. The warhead gives this missile an overall length of 17 feet. The diameter is 14 inches. New guidance techniques are unusually successful in hunting down and destroying the attacker. Radars of unique design are highly effective in detecting and tracking.
Hawks are birds of prey and fly at amazing speeds. The red-tailed hawk, for example, can fly at speeds exceeding 190 kilometers per hour. But for the Republic of Singapore Air Force, the Hawk stands for something that flies more than 15 times faster. Hawk missiles, the guardian of our skies. Fire Unit Commander Captain Clarence explained to me that Singapore is guarded in terms of concentric circles. Our first line of defense is our fighter aircraft. But if that fails, the next line of defense will be our Hawk missiles with a range of 40 kilometers. To find out how these missiles get deployed, I followed them on one of their deployment exercises. These exercises ensure the operational readiness of the Air Force's defense umbrella that operates on a 24/7 basis. The vehicles you see here are all part of the convoy that plays a part in the firing of the missiles. Wanting to see for myself how the missiles are loaded, I first checked out the launches.
We work in a team of 4, which consists of 2 crewmen, 1 crew chief, and 1 driver. So the driver, under the guidance of the crew chief, will guide the loader to transport the missile from the trailer to the launcher, or vice versa. I'm the crewman, I'll be the left and right eye of the crew chief in guiding the loader.
And nobody will question who's a terrorist.
Right. So you and this group are basically, in a sense, coming to Camelot to get a hearing for you specifically in relation to some of the things that have happened to you, right? But at the same time to bring notice to the public that this Defense Authorization Act is going to be a huge, well, it is a violation of every constitutional right out there, but that it pushes the envelope to such a degree that it must be dealt with. And you're suggesting certain strides be taken, right?
Yes. It's a very simple process if you understand how the problem-solution effect works. In order to create the problem, you can't have everybody know about it. You can't have everybody talking about it. You can't have everybody saying, well, yeah, now we're just waiting for the next false flag. If that information is too widely known and too widely held, the next false flag would blow up in their face and cause a shift in public consciousness to say, no, this is just our government messing with us, as opposed to panicking us into a blind fear.
Right. So we'll then allow them to go to war in a full-fledged war,
right,
instead of this this sort of sporadic war that they're conducting, right?
Correct. And the popular belief is there's a very, very easy way to prevent that from happening, and to get that information out to the public, it has been surmised that if we bring that to the level that it's at, if we address the issue directly via our constitutional rights and begin to notify the public in general that this is a problem and that it needs to be dealt with, and the way that's been proposed to me and to a lot of people is to create a petition that calls for the impeachment of every political person in Congress and the presidency that enacted this legislation as treasonous. Because it is treason to attempt to alter the Constitution through an unconstitutional means. If you create a law that circumvents the Constitution, you commit treason.
Fair enough. We haven't actually talked about your special training.
No.
And why it is that you do have some parallels with Duncan O'Finian. And so having talked about the sort of Defense Authorization Act, at least on a very surface way, and explained that is your motivation, can we actually go down that road to where we talk about where you've been and some of the information you have? Because your I don't know if it's your clearance level that gave you that, the additional information about black projects and about certain aspects of, well, to name Area 51 specifically, possibly other places that you haven't told me about yet. Do you want to go, start down that road slightly?
Sure. The level of secrecy and secret facilities and the capabilities of our nationally kept secrets would shatter most people's imagination of what is possible. Area 51, Los Alamos, still see 100 other top secret bases where information is kept or hidden from the public in general. It would be very hard to accept that all of this information that is currently held secret and classified is actually real.
And you know this because why?
Because I've experienced things in the military that I've then told people about, and by and large, people that have never held a top secret clearance would call me either, at the mildest, a liar, the greatest accusation, crazy. Certainly my experience at Area 51 and PSY training and what I learned there and the abilities that evolved from that training session that we all seem to pick up on rather easily were most easily described to the layman as Jedi skills. It's very easy, if you know what I know, to see the correlation between what happens in the movie in the Jedi training and what happens in Area 51 and PSY training. Certainly we in the Nines all possessed a certain level of intuition and ability that would seem advanced to anyone who watched us use it.
Can you elaborate on what you may have come across? Because if you're using these abilities, you're in Area 51, at what level did you go down to, or whatever? Are you aware of off-world craft? And I mean, you know what's out there I'm not sure how much you know about Camelot, but I assume that you know the general amount of information on the internet. What can you substantiate having personal sort of knowledge of?
Extra beyond human abilities for every human, not subject to popular belief, but we as human beings are far more capable of using many advanced skills beyond 5 senses. With a little bit of training and the knowledge that it was actually possible, most people could accurately predict the possibilities of the future, to know when other people were thinking about them, pick up on what is easy to describe as reading people, where you don't really need to use your 5 senses to be able to know what somebody else is thinking or feeling. A lot of that has to do simply with the belief that and the understanding that it's possible. That opens up a lot of doors.
Finian talks about having been enhanced physically. Do you
When Congress adopted and then Barack Obama signed the National Defense Authorization Act of 2012, tremendous concerns were voiced over the possibility that this federal act would allow the indefinite and rights-free detention of those who are called, quote, belligerents, even if they are American citizens. In a recent response, one state lawmaker in Rhode Island has jumped into action to protect the danger he sees for residents of his state, proposing a resolution to exempt his constituents from sections of the federal law. Republican Representative Daniel P. Gordon, Jr. told WND.com that he has drafted a resolution, which is now being circulated among the lawmakers of Rhode Island, to express opposition to the sections of the NDAA that suspend habeas corpus and civil liberties. Representative Gordon says, quote, given the fact that the constitutions of Rhode Island and that of the United States are replete with guarantees of individual liberties, rights to habeas corpus, and rights to freedom of speech, the offending sections of that NDAA law are repugnant to the sensibilities of anyone that has a basic understanding of the foundation of this country. Representative Gordon went on to say, when I took the oath of office, I swore that I would support the constitutions of Rhode Island and the United States, and before one single constituent of mine is snatched up in the dead of the night without due process under our laws, they'll have to pry those documents from my cold, dead hands, he said. He told WND the problem is made worse by the wording of the law. It's unclear exactly what is a, quote, belligerent person, and who will make that determination. This should be terrifying to all Americans, Representative Gordon said. And indeed, here at PP Simmons, we agree. This constitutional atrocity perpetrated upon the American people by the Congress and Barack Obama is a terrifying proposition. This is the very stuff of which the first American Revolution was made.
They lied about Vietnam. They lied about Cambodia. They lied about Laos and everyone they left behind there. They lied about Cuba. They lied about El Salvador and Nicaragua, Guatemala and Panama. They're lying right now about Honduras, just as they did back in the 1980s and over again, going back 100 years or more. Just ask General Smedley Butler. They lied about the Spanish-American War. They lied about the Mexican War. They lied about Pearl Harbor. They lied about Chile. They're lying about Venezuela. They lied about Kuwait. They lied about Iraq. They lied about 9/11. They lied about Afghanistan. They lied about Iraq. The entire war on terror is nothing but a hideous lie, unless you're the one that they're terrorizing. They lied about bin Laden. This man's lying about everything except about bombing Pakistan. That's one campaign promise he kept. He's lying about Pakistan, of course, but why is he lying so much? I wonder if it has anything to do with these guys. They lied about Libya. Are we looking at prima facie war criminals? It's a dead cert. They're lying about Yemen and Somalia and Sudan. They're lying about Syria. They're lying about Palestine. And they're lying about Iran. Iran is not our enemy. Iran is not our enemy. Iran is not our enemy. War is not now, and it never has been, the answer to any of these alleged problems. Truth is. And the truth is, Iran is not our enemy. Iran is not our enemy. Iran.
How the country could have descended so quickly into a police state. Far from a unique or isolated act, however, the NDAA is just the latest entry in a long list of steps toward the codification of outright martial law. This is the GRTV Backgrounder for Global Research TV. Each year, the United States Department of Defense's budget and expenditures are approved by Congress, which must pass a National Defense Authorization Act in order to fund the DoD. The most recent bill, however, the National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2012, shocked many by containing an extraordinary provision allowing for the indefinite detention without trial of anyone even suspected of providing support to individuals or groups identified as terrorists. Although this represents little change from the U.S. government's modus operandi in waging the so-called global war on terror, many were amazed to discover that this provision specifically applies to American citizens who can now be detained by American military personnel anywhere in the world, including on U.S. soil, and held indefinitely without trial. Perhaps it is not surprising that President Obama chose New Year's Eve as the date to sign the NDAA, as the revelry of the holiday predictably distracted Americans from the event. Particularly remarkable is the fact that this legislation has been almost universally identified as an overt act of tyranny by commentators of all political stripes, perhaps most importantly from sources that have traditionally defended the actions of Obama and his administration.
The ACLU said that Mr. Obama's decision to sign the National Defense Authorization Act, or NDAA, including the controversial detainee provisions, would tarnish his presidency. Quote, President Obama's action is a blight on his legacy because he will forever be known as the president who signed indefinite detention without charge or trial into law.
I will choose in my administration not to indefinitely detain U.S. citizens, meaning another administration can choose to do so, meaning that the bill says, yes, the president has the authority and the option of detaining U.S. citizens without a trial indefinitely. This is definitive. It is not just my interpretation. It's not just Glenn Greenwald's interpretation. As we told you yesterday, the team of lawyers at the ACLU, whose job it is to protect our civil liberties, says that is definitely the correct interpretation, and it is hideous. Now today, more people piling on.
My understanding is that when Carl Levin thought, the chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, thought in the Senate that the provision for it being applicable to American citizens on American soil was stripped out, the White House had it put back in, which is just dumber than mud. I can't understand how we'd want to go back to Reconstruction days. I mean, that's the last time we destroyed posse comitatus.
But this is the White House that thinks that it's okay to assassinate U.S. citizens abroad without due process in the case of Anwar al-Awlaki. So why wouldn't they want that in? Because this is codifying powers that they've already determined they have.
It's very true.
Now, on the heels of the NDAA, a new bill is making its way through Congress. The Enemy Expatriation Act, which would make the controversy about the NDAA null and void by simply stripping Americans of their American citizenship should they be accused of associating with government-deemed terrorist organizations.
The bipartisan legislation I introduced this week calls for a pragmatic recognition that a person who is purposefully and materially supporting acts of terror against the United States is demonstrating that they have no intent in acting as a U.S. citizen.
Congressman, so to be clear, this is not for people suspected, obviously, that civil liberties still exist in this country. It's only upon one's conviction that they would lose their citizenship. They'd likely be spending a lot of time behind bars as well.
Well, there would have to be a complete investigation. There's a standard of clear and convincing evidence. But in the case of Mr. al-Awlaki in Yemen, He has made public statements that have been hostile to this country. He has participated in operational aspects of terror attacks on this country, involved in Major Hassan. Now, we may never get to a trial with him. He's operating overseas, but there would be an investigation conducted by the State Department to determine this individual is an enemy combatant, a belligerent, and that would be the standard.
What the outrage over the NDAA and now the Enemy Expatriation Act reveals, however, is not that Obama or the current members of the House are suddenly taking the American government in a startling new direction, but that they are in fact continuing to pursue a coordinated policy agenda that has persisted through administration after administration on both the left and right sides of the political aisle for decades. In 1864, during the American Civil War, Landon P. Milligan and 4 others were sentenced to death by a military court after they were found guilty of planning to overthrow the state governments of Indiana, Michigan, and Ohio. The case reached the Supreme Court after the war ended, where it was found to be unconstitutional for U.S. citizens to be tried in military tribunals as long as civilian courts were operating. This precedent remained intact for almost a century, with the Posse Comitatus Act of 1878 further delineating the boundary between the military and civilians by barring U.S. military from engaging in civil police actions, except by act of Congress. In 1942, however, the Supreme Court ruled on ex parte Quirin, a case involving the detention of 8 German saboteurs during World War II and their trial as civilians in a military tribunal. The court ruled that the 8 men, one of whom was a U.S. citizen, could be tried as unlawful combatants in the war, a status applying to civilians who engage in armed conflict during times of war. Unsurprisingly, it is this ex parte Quirin decision, allowing for the military detention of civilians, not the ex parte Milligan precedent, which both the Bush and Obama administrations have relied on to try to assert their authority to detain civilians as unlawful combatants in the so-called War on Terror. In the immediate wake of the 9/11 attacks, Congress passed an authorization for use of military force, which authorized the president to use all necessary and appropriate force against those nations, organizations, or persons he determines planned, authorized, committed, or aided the terrorist attacks. Less than 2 months later, Bush invoked that authorization to issue a military order declaring that individuals detained in the War on Terror be tried in military tribunals. The administration immediately began applying this order to detainees in Afghanistan, regardless of affiliation. The practice of detaining these enemy combatants at Guantanamo Bay and other military detention centers has been challenged repeatedly in the courts. When the Supreme Court finally ruled in Hamdan v. Rumsfeld that the detainees could not be held as unlawful enemy combatants, but had to be held as prisoners of war in accordance with the Geneva Conventions, Congress passed the Military Commissions Act of 2006, specifically authorizing military commissions for the detainees. In 2008, the Supreme Court ruled that Guantanamo prisoners were entitled to the U.S. justice system, but in 2009, Obama Attorney General Holder and Solicitor General Kagan testified that they believed the government could detain combatants in accordance with the laws of war, thus sidestepping the issue of determining a prisoner's status or their right to trial. Now, the NDAA of 2012 seems to extend all of these precedents and provisions to U.S. citizens. This comes in addition to Peace Prize laureate Obama's stunning declaration that he has the right to kill American civilians anywhere in the world without so much as a trial. Perhaps most worryingly of all, when Obama expressed reservations about the NDAA, it was not because he, as a constitutional scholar, felt the idea of using the military to detain American citizens on American soil was an unconscionable abrogation of everything the U.S. Constitution and Bill of Rights stood for, but because he felt that the 2001 authorization for use of military force had already granted him this power as supposed commander-in-chief in the supposed War on Terror, which has never actually been declared. Now, many are asking what can be done to prevent this seemingly inevitable slide into overt military control over American citizens and others around the globe. One voice providing an answer to this question is Stuart Rhodes, a Yale Law graduate and constitutional law scholar who founded Oath Keepers, an organization dedicated to informing American police and military personnel about the nature of their oath to uphold the Constitution and how that oath precludes them from participating in acts that clearly violate the Constitution. Stuart Rhodes appeared on Corbett Report Radio last week to talk about the history of the use of enemy combatant status as a legal smokescreen to violate the Bill of Rights, and how citizens can work to reverse the damage that has already been done by the passing of this legislation.
Well, ever since 9/11, it's been the same exact claim of power through both administrations. And that the claim is that your citizenship is irrelevant, that they can apply the international laws of war to Americans precisely as they do to someone in Afghanistan and Iraq. No difference. If the NSA spying on Americans without warrant was defended during the Bush administration as being the power of the commander-in-chief to surveil the battlefield, when America is a battlefield. Bush detained 2 American citizens, Jose Padilla and Yasser Hamdi, in both cases military detention, no access to an attorney, no grand jury indictment, no civilian trial, nothing. And unfortunately, the Supreme Court upheld that in the Hamdi case in 2004, upheld